Hello, Kimberly. How are you?
Hi, it's great to see you. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Likewise, very much wonderful to see you, and we're very honored to get time with you and all around. So
Thank you.
you're most welcome. We definitely welcome our viewers that are either here with us live or ultimately the ones that will be looking at and listening to the recording. This is in anticipation, of course, of the May 13th event around rethinking women's leadership in business, in anticipation of that event, and likewise in collaboration, of course, with the Women Business Collaborative and most definitely Andy Simon. And we have the great opportunity to be with Kimberly around entrepreneurship and how we can catalyze women's entrepreneurship and the overall impact that's possible. So truly, truly privileged to have you with us today.
Well, thank you. And those are wonderful topics and topics I'm absolutely passionate about. First I'll have to say welcome everyone to Kane Communications Group. So this is our lobby here at Kane. And I'll tell you, Sai, the folks who are watching now are among our first guests. We started an expansion of our office. It's probably in December of 2019. And the expansion was set to take place over the course of a few months. And we were supposed to be moving into this office in April of 2021. And then COVID-19 hit. And the expansion itself continued, but everyone in the office, of course, had to leave, and we haven't had guests here at all. So we're introducing the office to all of you as part of this show, and it's wonderful to be sitting here and being able to have a conversation with you, in this entryway.
Excellent. And indeed, it's a beautiful office. I know you do some brilliant, absolutely brilliant work. And, we definitely want you to introduce yourself, but I know just kind of almost diving into it, fastest growing company, definitely is some accolades, critical accolades, if you will, coming into play. So I would love to have people get to know you and understand a little bit more about Kane. And here we are.
Yeah, well, it's kind of surreal, that recognition by Inc. magazine just earlier this year to be recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in the Midwest. Unbelievable in all candor to me. So I'm the president and CEO of Kane Communications Group. I founded the company in 2013, really with a vision, an idea, in my basement. So at that time, I was a single mom of four. I had a wonderful career in journalism, a wonderful career in business. I had a son who was diagnosed with mental illness. And at his young age, I found that there was a real conflict in my interest in being a high performer in my career and my need to be available to this amazing young man who really needed more of his mom in his life. And staying in a traditional work environment really wasn't an option for me. I had to find a way to create a future for myself, but also be available for this little guy and his three siblings. So I started Kane Communications Group with this vision of being able to operate at the top of my license, being able to create communication strategies and tactics that truly made an impact, but also being able to be available for my son and his siblings when I needed to be, without feeling guilty for having to take some time away from work. And I think, this commitment side to these little people and the commitment to figuring out kind of the path, the journey that I had to be on to make the economics of this work really drove me to be very intentional in the business that I was creating at Kane Communications Group. I didn't have the time or the luxury of not being successful. I had to figure this out. And I think one of the nice things that actually opened up for me was, I think the CEOs and the individuals I was working with saw that intentionality, saw that commitment and that passion from me. And it earned me a tremendous amount of respect and helped me grow my business. So I hired my first employee in 2015. I hired 2 more employees the next year. Today, we're at 2021. We have almost 20 employees here at Kane Communications Group. Clearly, we're not in my basement anymore. We've moved away from being a traditional public relations and communications agency to being a truly integrated public relations firm, but always with the goal of being very intentional in the way we work, and driving with business leaders towards outcomes, not headlines, press releases, beautiful creative, but truly helping to deliver outcomes. And that's what business leaders need. So that's a bit of my journey since we started Kane in 2013.
Fantastic. And you call out something very, very powerful, quite honestly. The word impact, when a lot of people hear that word, they apply it in a business setting, if you will. But the reality is we're integrated humans. So you have to have impact both personally in your personal setting and family life, as well as your professional setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people feel what we do, right? Whether it's a technology solution or a communication solution, whether it's a product you buy or a service that you need, we're not just spending money on something, we're spending money on something to get a result. And I think if we can feel good about that result as well, if we can feel good about the product or service, I think that makes us more loyal customers. And from my perspective as a business, it makes it more likely that my customers are continued to bring me back to do the work that we're doing.
Excellent. So one of the immediate takeaways is you don't have to sacrifice your personal and your professional, but really integrate them. And I think that, and it's never easy, respectfully.
Well, I think that this is a newer path that I really want women to take seriously. I think it's vital. I think it's critical that we carve a path where we are not compromising our personal lives for the professional life. And I think that women need to press pause and stop at various points in our career to redefine what that means. When you're young in your career and you're just getting going, it may be all about work. It may be all about discovering, what is this career I'm getting into? How far can I go? But there are inflection points in our lives that we all have to be very real about. Parents who may need us, children who may need us, a spouse who may lose a job, our own unemployment. And those are real inflection points that almost every one of us experiences throughout our career. And, I don't think any of them is negative. I think they're all opportunities for us to reflect on where we are and what we're doing and what the next step needs to be. So I didn't start out to be an entrepreneur. I never envisioned that I would be an entrepreneur. In fact, I'll share with you, Sai, that I went to the University of Southern California, graduated from USC in '93. I had a double major, broadcast journalism and urban politics. I was really focused on becoming a journalist, and I can tell you a little bit more about that journey if there's time. But I think I was the last graduating class, or one of the last graduating classes, to not have to take a math class. So I didn't have to graduate with any math. And I thought, I'm fine. I'm a journalist. I'm going to go and write. That's all that matters. But today I'm a CEO. So I really had to figure all of that out. So the inflection point that hit me, of course, was, when that little one was struggling with mental illness. I left my career in television news, went into the business world, started carving a new path, and found that I needed to step out on my own and create my own company. I remember people around me saying to me, Kimberly, what are you doing? You were a journalist, then you went into executive search, then you went back into the corporate sector. You're really going to destroy your resume by doing so many different things. I took that seriously a little bit, but I was also very curious about the journey that I was on, recognizing that every change I made in my life brought me something new. There were new things I learned. Learned about business, learned about human resources, learned about the importance of brand and communications while I was in executive search. I never imagined I would learn all of those things. All of those things really became the foundation for the work that I'm doing today. The connections I made when I was in executive search, the connections I made when I was a journalist, all came back full circle to really enable Kane to be as successful as we are today. So I think when we have those inflection points, they may not be what we expect, but guess what? That's life. And I think if you can take as much of the good from those inflection points as possible, ask yourself what you can learn from them and how you can apply them to the next step, you truly will be that much stronger and more well-rounded as you move forward.
Very beautifully expressed. And I want to honestly push a little bit deeper to explore the magic that has gotten you here, respectfully. As Kimberly, as you encountered those conversations about doubt, right? And there's many myths out there and what have you, and the risks, how did you find the courage, my good friend, to really confront those myths, confront those doubts, and embrace the journey and move forward?
You know what? I think you have to ask yourself, how much doubt are you willing to accept? And what good does doubt do for you? Whether it's your own self-doubt or someone else's doubt or questioning of you, I think you really have to say, what good is this for me? I think sometimes there comes a point where I'm going to use a word fairly loosely, but it's the word denial. And if I start feeling feelings that aren't going to help me continue moving forward, that aren't going to help me take care of my family, aren't going to help me grow my business, I don't need to feel those feelings. I'm just going to deny those and I'm going to move on. And it actually, really became effective for me. Again, if you think about being a single mom of 4, I had left my career. I didn't have a lot, Sai, at that time in my life. I didn't have time for self-doubt. If I gave myself one moment, to really question myself or to wallow in it, I would have let my family down. I would have let myself down. So I didn't, and I just kept going. And it's obviously worked out well.
Definitely. And it takes a lot of discipline, right? To really channel your energy in such a way that you don't give into the doubt, but truly, in a sense, deny the doubt realistically and continue to push forward.
It's excruciating. And sometimes it feels like you're really being unauthentic when you're denying those negative feelings, which are very real, and they're caused for real reasons. It's excruciating to have to push those feelings down. Take a deep breath. But you have to. I mean, really, again, I don't know what good that self-doubt does. If it causes some introspection, I think that's fine. But if it really causes you to question yourself and go back on what you believe is true and what you believe is good for you and your family, it's not worth your time.
Very, very eloquently said. And Kimberly, as you kind of look at that broad spectrum of experience and in the context of the word entrepreneur and entrepreneurship, everybody has a different notion of what that really means. Some people, I don't even want to guess kind of what it means to be, but help us understand, if you will, sort of, if you were to communicate, what is the essence of that through your journey? How would you share that, Kimberly?
Sure. Well, I think if you really reflect on your life, if we all really reflect on our lives, go back to our earliest days in childhood. We're all entrepreneurs at that time, right? As children, we're coming up with visions, we're coming up with creative ideas, we're coming up with story ideas, storylines, and we're playing those out. And we might be creating new things in our world based on these visions. So we're all entrepreneurial. As you kind of get into the grown-up world, if you will, I think sometimes that entrepreneurship, that enthusiasm, is tempered by kind of the reality of being in a lane. It's a job description. You're hired with these key responsibilities and these key expectations, and there's not a lot of creativity that's built into it. But to me, I think entrepreneurship is having a vision and then executing on that vision to achieve a result. And throughout my career, I've had those opportunities to be an entrepreneur, or maybe you would call it an intrapreneur, in the companies I've worked for, but not always to a positive effect. I mean, oftentimes I would run into bosses who would say, hey, wait a second, that's not in your job description. I need you focused over there. Even if I could build a case for doing something that was cool and new, there wasn't always a lot of tolerance for that. And I think, when you are somebody who has ideas, and I think if you're someone who wants to grow in your job, I think companies need to create environments where employees can think big. They're supported in coming up with ideas, in testing those ideas out and seeing what can happen. As an employer today, I love letting go of the reins and letting people here in this company have a vision for their own futures at Kane and create them. And I think there are very few people who are here today who have been here for a while, who haven't moved into new positions that they have helped to create. And there are bottom line and top line benefits to my company by inspiring entrepreneurship and supporting employees in that venture as well here.
Thank you so much for that. And definitively, I'm glad you called out the entrepreneur, the intrapreneur, and that facet of it. I really appreciate how you said we really all come into the world as entrepreneurs, and then we temper it. I use slightly different terminology, and I want to kind of just mention it here and sort of get your reaction to it, as well as really bring in a few other aspects. I say we're all born wild and we're domesticated.
Sure.
And as we're domesticated, if we become overly domesticated, that life in us withers away. But if we temper the degree of domestication, then everybody really benefits.
Right.
Because it's a thriving organization.
Right.
And Kimberly, I would love for you to share with us sort of, it's not easy to let go and let things happen within your world. What suggestions do you have for leaders in all sorts of positions in that letting go?
Sure. Well, we use a really cool operating system here called Traction. And Sai, you might be familiar with Traction. It's really a way of running your business. And when you're a small company and you're a growing company, everybody has their hands in the middle of things, right? In the beginning, it's just me. I'm doing sales. I'm delivering on the service. I'm doing all of the accounting. I'm, client service, main point of contact. But if I'm going to grow, I have to start letting go, right? I have to delegate. I have to bring people onto the team who can do some of the things that I no longer need to do. And I think it's really important for everyone to understand, what does the top of your license look like for you? Where do you want to be in your career? Where do you want to be in your job today? And what's getting in the way of that? And I think when you're really clear on, again, I'll use another Traction term, your accountabilities, what you're accountable for, it also becomes clear what you're not accountable for. And that gives you an opportunity to find someone else that you can delegate to. The other nice kind of term about Traction is when you're delegating to them, you're not just telling them to do something that you don't want to do anymore. You also have the opportunity to elevate them in their own careers. So it's a win-win-win. It's a win for your career because you're continuing to elevate in your role. It's a win for someone else's career because you're empowering them with things that you no longer need to do that may help them grow. And it's a win for the business because people are much clearer on what they need to do in their jobs. Sometimes I think there's a kind of an emotional connection, and I'm speaking more for women. I think we don't want to burden someone else with having to do our stuff. Don't worry, I can handle it. I got that. No, I don't need you to help me. Get over that. If you're going to grow, the people around you, if your company's going to grow, I think you want to look at it a little bit more clearly and logically. And I think that helps, with kind of that growth in your career.
Definitively, and in a lot of ways, that people associate letting go with losing control, and
right.
And in a lot of perspectives, if we look at the organization as an evolving, if you will, organism, then really it's an ecosystem that by letting go, you can actually gain control as to what are the right areas to focus on.
Yeah. And by letting go, you also may gain some great new ideas that you would never have had on your own. And it's pretty inspiring to see, how that happens when you're putting somebody else in charge. And I think it's also important, though, if you think about that letting go of control, you don't just say, okay, this is your job now. You need to spend time when you're delegating to someone else, making sure that they understand exactly what's expected and coaching them and guiding them a little bit as they're taking on that new work.
Beautifully expressed. And that really gets into sort of the next thought is you're not disengaging, but you're truly leading at that point and finding the way to lead.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it's harder to lead. It's harder to have a vision. It's harder to think big. It's harder to build those relationships when you're stuck in the weeds. And I think sometimes, again, women are encumbered with this feeling that if we feel guilty if we ask somebody else to do this for us. And we've got to get over that feeling. There are times when, you may be the only one who can get it done, or there may be times when you're the only one your children want to get something done. And that's okay. I think we definitely wear a lot of different hats. But I think that if we're clear as much as we can on what we want to own and delegating to others, it does help us move into that leadership position.
Excellent. And you've referenced it a few times now, that this element of caring, how we struggle with the caring, respectfully. How, in your journey, how did you confront that caring, bring it into balance, really, for lack of any other words, kind of make some of the hard decisions that you've had to make?
Yeah. I think sometimes you get to a point where you have no choice. And in fact, I was just talking with one of my coworkers about this yesterday. Empathy is one of the core values here at Kane, and we really lead with empathy, and that means meeting people where they're at, and being very considerate of those individuals, whether it's our coworkers or our clients or others. But sometimes that caring element can get in the way because we feel so much compassion for someone that it can be very difficult to make tough decisions. And I think when you look at things logically, though, you look at what's best for the business. And sometimes that's hard to say, like what's best for the business. You have got to default to that. Because if you make caring for someone, perhaps an underperforming employee, or caring for someone, perhaps it's a client who really needs your help but can't afford to pay for the work, you really compromise the viability of the business. And therefore, you're really compromising the future for your employees and people who depend on you. So you've got to look at it logically and make decisions from that position.
An excellent point. While a lot of leaders respectfully think they're making the right decision, whatever that might mean, by caring about an individual, they're compromising other individuals and what have you.
Yeah.
I share sort of ever so quickly. I actually worked with an executive, a CEO, who was caring so much about an individual, compromising the organization. I actually said to him, you do realize you're making those decisions so you can sleep better at night, but the rest of the people here in the organization are not sleeping. And
right.
A pretty direct, blunt comment, but sometimes that little bit of shock wakes people up. In this case, it woke the person up as to, hey, I really need to think about what I'm doing here.
Yeah. And oftentimes I think the answer is not clear. If somebody were to do something illegal or really out of line, the answer is clear. Oftentimes the answer is not clear, and it becomes a moral conflict where you really care about this individual who's on your team who may be underperforming, and that's tough. That keeps you up at night. I mean, I have had dreams that have woken me up at night where I'm mentally trying to work through some of these very difficult situations. But again, if you want the business to survive and you want to keep top employees, sometimes you have got to say, I've cared. I have led with caring, and now I need to make a different decision.
And I think you expressed it very, very vividly. It's leading with caring, not giving into making the wrong decisions and justifying it through caring. And very, very distinct.
But I think the other just important nuance there is if you're talking about employees or if you're even talking about clients, I think by enabling bad behavior, you're also disabling them from moving on. And I think that's a very important point for people to think about if they're stuck in that kind of situation.
And it truly does turn into, exactly as you're saying, it turns into a lose-lose at that point, because the individual loses and everyone loses, definitely.
Yep.
So 2020 was, sort of switching a little bit as to how you leverage your wisdom, respectfully, and have leveraged and continue to leverage your wisdom. 2020 was quite the year with many, many nuances to a multitude of crises.
Yeah.
Insights, wisdom relative to navigating 2020 from a crisis management perspective, Kimberly.
Sure. Boy, where do you start? 2020, I think it was a journey for us all. And, I don't think, I have complete clarity on how we made it through 2020. I'm not sure if I shared with you when you and I spoke a few weeks ago, but we lost every one of our for-profit clients during the first month or so of the pandemic. every one of our for-profit clients. Two of them went into bankruptcy. And so even though we had serviced them well during the first quarter, they weren't even able to pay their bills from the first quarter. And that was a reality check where, again, I have this team of employees now whose livelihoods are on the line, not just the business whose livelihood could be on the line. And there was a tremendous amount of creative thinking that we had to do to make sure that we were able to make it through 2020 as unscathed as possible. And I won't say we were lucky. I had really diversified the business going into 2020 with a focus on building relationships in government, nonprofit, and for-profit. So while the for-profit sector went down, the nonprofit and the government sectors actually went up. So we were able to actually grow after that kind of crazy start through 2020. But there was also a level of self-awareness, I think, that we gained. And I do believe you're seeing this nationally and even globally right now, where during the crisis of 2020, there were things that we had taken for granted that we realized we can't take for granted. One of them was relationships. Our relationships with our customers, our relationships with our employees, our relationships with our stakeholders. And when you recognize the importance of those relationships, the need for very intentional and authentic communications became vital. So as CEOs and companies were going into crisis management, those leaders who were able to step up and be authentic, consistent, vulnerable communicators were the ones who kept their employees closer, even if they had to make tough decisions, kept their stakeholders and their customers closer, even when they had to make tough decisions. And I think and I hope that kind of that intentional crisis communications, that intentional, I guess, commitment to communications doesn't go away. I think the other thing that we realized was how important it is to be prepared. A number of companies who ended up pulling us in, companies and government organizations, didn't have crisis management plans. And they really needed us to provide context and be a sounding board for how to manage through a crisis. So I hope as we get into this point, one of the reflections is crises happen and we've got to be prepared. Even if we don't want a crisis to happen, what are the lessons learned from 2020 that could enable us to put that foundational crisis plan in place? So communicating authentically and often, having that crisis communications plan in place. But the big step back and the big aha that I think is transforming the way we look at leadership today is this recognition that business can't continue as usual. We can't continue measuring success based just on our products, profits, and services. We have got to measure success based on a different criteria. There's a shared value that we as businesses can create within our community to help prevent some of the pain and the destruction that we saw, especially among minority groups in our communities during COVID-19. And as you look at the numbers today, I was just looking at an article, I think it was in Forbes, about kind of the winners and the losers, in 2021 as we're pulling out of the pandemic. And you still see these tremendous gaps. White Americans are getting employment faster than minority Americans. Women are still struggling with stress at much greater rates than men. So I think as business leaders, and I don't care how small you are, I have a small company. As business leaders, we need to recognize that leadership has to change, and we have to look at more than just traditional business metrics as metrics of success. We have to look at, being kind of beating heartbeats in our community, and how can we create more shared value?
It's tremendous, Kimberly, all around, because I think you've called out so many different elements that we really need to integrate, and you've integrated them beautifully as you've navigated. I think just sort of to highlight a few things that I really heard you sharing is there is a degree of preparation. And by being prepared, we diversify, which actually gives us resilience, a degree of resilience as the waters get choppy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And then the awareness, and this is the two words that have come up numerous times in our conversation, is that awareness tied to directly intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
And respectfully, it takes a lot of courage, quite honestly, to be intentional.
Well, and this is where I might be getting ahead of a question you have for me, but there's a word that I have come across through the course of my journey as a leader that really I keep top of mind. So you've talked about courage, and I think when people think about leaders, they tend to think about people who make quick decisions, they make tough decisions, they are out front, maybe taking the risks, they hold other people accountable. But I think as we're looking at this kind of evolution of leadership, I think courage is a really important part of it. I think empowering others is a really important part of it. I think being aspirational is very important. And the word that I keep top of mind right now is the word permission. So I think we need to recognize that we have the permission to lead differently. There may not be a playbook for how we need to lead going into the future, but we need to give ourselves permission to recognize that leaders have to lead differently. As I was growing Kane, I would often get to these inflection points in the business where maybe a client held a belief that I thought was incorrect, or maybe a client wanted me to do something and I had data that told me to do something different. And as a woman working with a male CEO, my gut inclination was, oh, well, I can't tell him he's wrong. He's the CEO. I really shouldn't. It's incorrect. It's not respectful for me to push back and say you're wrong. But when I gave myself permission to tell the truth based on how I saw the truth because of the research I'd done, or because of the experience I had, the doors that opened up for me and the success that created for my company were beyond what I could have imagined. And I see this word permission as a very important, subtle word. It's not raising your hand and saying, hey, can I do this? It's really recognizing, as I'll say, as a woman leader, when you come to a point where you feel that there's an obstacle, what okay can you give yourself to do something different, something you may think as a woman I'm not allowed to do, but you give yourself that permission to do it differently and see what happens. And I think, I've seen some astonishing things happen with women in my life who have come to that point and have said, okay, I'm going to give myself permission to do things differently.
And again, eloquently expressed, it's not seeking permission, it's truly giving yourself, if you will, permission in that fashion. And that's very, very key.
Exactly.
So Kimberly, how do we respectfully spread that wisdom? How do you enable other women and other men, quite honestly, to recognize that they can give themselves permission?
Yeah. Well, I think it's vital that those who are in leadership positions in companies and even as parents create pathways that help your children or your employees recognize that they have permission to do things differently. There's a neurobiologist who I really hold in the highest regard. Her name is Dr. Joanne Deek. And years ago, she did research about really the difference between the way men lead and the way women lead. And she was fascinated. Why is it that women need to go places in groups? Why is it that women need to check in and get kind of feedback or have other people as sounding boards, where men, they can just, go off and do their own thing? She showed a picture of a little girl in a doorway holding her dog back. She just wanted to protect her dog. And that's just how women are naturally wired. And she showed a picture of a young boy jumping off of a porch into a pile of leaves. He had no idea what was in that pile of leaves, but that's just how he's wired. And I think, as parents and in the workplace, we really have to help our employees understand how to take calculated risks and then celebrate their success. I have one gal on my team who was very afraid of public speaking. And this was really her big fears, something she wants to overcome. And we had an opportunity to do a series of live briefings with government leaders here in the Milwaukee area related to COVID-19. That meant, coordinating potentially dozens of reporters on a live Zoom call that she would have to moderate with these government leaders. And we told her we believed in her. We helped her prepare. She threw up before the briefings, but over and over again, she kept on going back. And the confidence that she developed over the course of time, you see it in her today, and it's spectacular. But it's about recognizing what are the barriers, what are the calculated risks I can take, what is the support that I need to get there, because ultimately, what is the outcome that I want to achieve? And she was aware of what her outcome was. She wanted to be more confident as a public speaker. I think sometimes as employers, we see potential in employees that they may not see. We may be aware of what's holding them back. And I really think it's vital for us to help to create pathways for those employees to confront some of the things that are holding them back, so that they can grow past them. And I'll use the term self-actualize. They can really begin to self-actualize. So it's about, again, being intentional as leaders in that respect.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And there is a delicate balance, right? Being risk aware so that we take the risks that make sense to take, and we're averse to ones that we should be averse to, but truly finding that balance.
Exactly.
Kimberly, as we've touched upon, definitively your role as CEO of Kane and what have you, there's two elements. I want to kind of put them as sort of two questions, and really have you kind of explore it with us a little bit. The one is the dynamic of being the CEO of the organization and what that implicates to you as an individual in that role. And then two, around that role, the dynamics between males and females.
So the implication of being the CEO means I've got everyone's back, right? Yeah. And I have to create the future. I've got to create the vision for the future. I have to build the relationships to get there. And I have to make sure that the organization is stable. In terms of the dynamics of employees, I think it's so important for us to build a culture where employees are not competitive against each other, but employees are all in and supportive of each other. I think, creating opportunities that, may not feed the bottom line, but opportunities that feed the souls of the employees, the people who work here, is so important. So we've created a purpose committee here at Kane, where we've selected a word that's a rallying cry for the company for the year. And we have a committee of employees who are coming up with concepts and deciding how we activate or bring the concept of purpose to life as an organization. So I think as the CEO of the company, it's my responsibility to make sure we know where we're going and that the organization is stable. But I've also got to make sure that we have a great environment where employees who are probably here more than they are home, right, feel like they're not cogs in the wheel, but they're actually a vital part of helping this organization achieve our potential.
Fantastic. And Kimberly, I'm going to hone in a little bit deeper on your role. You've got the right part. You've fostered the right conditions in terms of the culture and the environment. And I say right, being fit to what you would like to accomplish relative to your purpose. But specifically, there must be times of being lonely, being alone, not having, if you will, the confidants available to have those exploratory conversations that really linger in all of our heads, if you will, but
Sure.
Specifically in the role that you embrace.
That concept of it's lonely at the top.
Yeah.
There was a concept I was really aware of before I became a CEO. And then you really know what that means when you are in this position, because you can't talk about everything with your employees. Even you can't even talk about everything with members of your executive team. But I'm not sure if you knew this. In 2013, before I started Kane, maybe it was 2012, I actually ran for office. I ran to be alderman in the community that I live in, the city of Racine. And I went through a training program called Emerge. It was a many months long training program. And when I graduated from Emerge, I was, ready to run for office. And one of the things you learned through the training program was the importance of having what you call a kitchen cabinet. And that's a group of objective advisors who are your sounding board. They're your confidants. And I have that today. I don't know where I would be if I didn't have that group of outside advisors who know me. They know when I'm not being real. They know when I'm tripping myself up. I can call them at any time and say, here's a problem I'm agonizing over. Hold me accountable. Tell me if I'm going in the wrong direction, or if I'm missing something, or if you think I'm going in the right direction. So I think it's vital for all of us to have that kitchen cabinet sounding board who can guide us.
Most definitely. And as we're approaching sort of the our time together, as we're progressing, I want to really sort of ask the question: if you could identify, I'm going to say top 3 things that you would really encourage leaders across industries, across organizations to truly embrace. What would those top 3 things be, if you will, as entrepreneurs, as leaders, etc.?
Well, I think the first one is to define your purpose. We can't just be in business to make money anymore. We just can't. And I want leaders to dig deep and identify not just your why, but your purpose. What is driving you, and what is the impact that you want to create? So I think that would be one of the first. I think the second one that is important is to embrace your role as a communicator. Today, if you are a leader, if you want to be a leader, you need to be an authentic communicator. People who are, in our offices today, the next generation and the generation behind that, they need to be connected to your organization beyond just what you do. They need to hear from you. So I think that authentic communication is also very important. I think the third person the third element that I might encourage is the importance of just being a good person. I think businesses today, you look at how much money you can make as an entrepreneur, or how much money you can make as a business. You've got to always think about your people. You've got to always think about the people in your community, and making sure that you're treating them with respect, making sure that you're doing what you can to elevate them, being involved in the community. I think that's vital. It's easy to get caught on the treadmill and to become transactional and be focused on making as much money as possible or getting to a certain title. But I think that's not good leadership. You've got to be a good person.
Excellent. And I'm gonna build off a little bit off of that particular sort of set of elements. Guidance and if you will, very much wisdom, I'll say to females that specifically, could benefit from sort of 3 points in a sense that they should really embrace. And I'm being very, very deliberate now relative to the female aspect, and then really how males can support that, quite honestly.
Yeah. Well, I think for women, define success, and remember, success can change at different points in your life, but really define what success looks like for you. I think it's also important to figure out what's getting in your way of success. And that's a deep conversation you need to have with yourself. There are things that get in your way. There are roadblocks and obstacles you create for yourself, and identify what those are, and get really real on what they are and how to overcome them. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes I think as women, we feel like we got to know it all. We have to be it all. And that is not true. Don't be afraid to ask for help. One other thing I might mention, Sai, is the importance of self-awareness when you get into a position, whether you're the CEO or you're the head of HR or the head of sales. I really want women and men to be more than that title. I think when you get into that position, sometimes people are like, yeah, okay, got the title, here's my card, I've got the salary, whatever it is. But that's just the first step. Now, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? And I think it's important for us to look around and say, how can I create a work environment that is better? A work environment that helps people thrive. How can I bring entrepreneurship into this position? How can we partner with other organizations or nonprofits to create shared value? So don't stop at the title. Don't stop at the next title. Think about the impact that you can make and that maybe you're responsible for making as a leader.
Excellent. And definitively that bridge between awareness and impact and intent, if you will, requires a lot of discipline, a lot of energy, a lot of scars that we pick up along the way that make us stronger to be able to meet those commitments and our purpose.
Yeah. And self-confidence as well. And I think that people need to know that they're allowed to feel self-confident. That's not hubris, right? Yep. It's not conceit, but it's self-confident. And I think when you operate from a place of self-confidence, your work is better. You uplift people around you, and just know that no matter your position or whatever you're doing in life, you're allowed to feel self-confident, and we need you to feel self-confident.
Yeah. And truly that delicate, and I'll speak respectfully, very openly, as I see leaders and as others experience leaders like yourself who can balance that delicate balance between ego and identity, and it gives others courage to say, we see it happening. Definitely.
Yeah. Maybe there's a bit of grace to it, right?
There, most definitely, there has to be grace, quite honestly. Otherwise, it really wouldn't. If there wasn't grace to it, then others wouldn't experience it as it needs to be experienced in order that it empowers them very openly.
Yeah.
So, and one last question, if you will, really, as I've asked across numerous conversations, but particularly here, what can we do respectfully as males to support in partnership folks like yourself, folks like, others and what have you, just as good partners and allies and citizens?
Well, recognize that we're all in this together, right? I love the concept of leadership, but I love how men lead and how women lead. I think it's important to recognize that we lead differently and that there's value to both leadership styles. I think, men can sponsor women. And, I hate to think that we're not there yet, but all the metrics show that women aren't there. There are still gaps in income. There are still gaps in equity of opportunity. There are still countries around this world that don't support the advancement of women. So I think sponsoring women is important. I think looking at ways to create equity is vital. A couple of years ago, I was driving in the car with he's 17 now, he was 13 at this time. He was in the backseat of my carload of boys, and he saw a sign that said "Men at Work." And he jumped out of his seat as much as he could. And he said, "Mom, look at that sign. That's discriminatory. It says men at work. It should say women at work." And I thought, yes, that's a small win. So I think if men can help us create equity, I think if we can raise our sons and our daughters to recognize that women need to hold an equal place in leadership, I think creating opportunities for women to speak and lead is important. That son today is student body president for his high school, and he knows how important it is for him to not say something and to ask a woman or a minority on student government to be the person who speaks. I think those are some of the things that men can do.
Excellent. And I have one other question, actually, because you immediately triggered it for me. I readily acknowledge my mother as a crucial, pivotal force in my journey. And I learned a lot relative to leadership. Any sort of wisdom, respectfully, and you've got a lot you've already shared, but anything specific to mothers as to how they can truly contribute in that capacity?
Well, as we're raising our sons, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I think, bring them with you, whether you're a mom who stays at home or you're a mom who works in the workforce. I think make sure your boys have equal responsibility, that you're not catering to them or pandering to them. I think if you are in the workforce, bring them with you. Let them see you in action. I think it's important to have conversations with them as well. I have 3 boys, and I know that their perspective on the world is very different than mine. Their perspective on the world is very different than my daughter's perspective on the world. They don't experience the world the same way that we do. And we get into some really passionate, spirited conversations about that. There's a self-awareness that they have to gain. And I think as women, we have to challenge our boys to gain that self-awareness about what our life experience is. At the same time, I think we have to challenge our daughters to take risks and be willing to push the envelope and speak out and maybe do things that aren't just what girls would do, right?
Yeah.
So that they can play that equal place in the world.
Wonderful. We're so appreciative of your time all around, Kimberly. Any sort of parting thoughts, my friend, before we sign off?
Well, I think it's wonderful, Sai, that you are putting this conference together. You have such a phenomenal group of speakers and panelists. So I really applaud you for that. And, I hope that you have a lot of people who are attending and, gaining the wisdom that you have to offer through this conference. The more we can talk about this, the more we can bring together people in that collective environment to have these kinds of informed and authentic conversations. I think the more we begin to change things. We know that women are the heart of so many communities. So I think the more that we can help elevate women, I think the healthier our communities and our families will be.
Excellent point to end on. Thank you ever so much. And truly, truly appreciate the time and the wisdom that you've shared. And we look forward to more conversations on the 13th. And we hope that folks will join us. And thank you again all around, Kimberly.
Absolutely, Sai. Thank you so much.
Thank you.